Chapter 4, Lust Will Not Set Me Free. Lord Melbourne and Lord George arrived at Lord George's mansion in London at dusk. Both were very serious, even angry, especially Lord Melbourne. "What a day! At least you could tell me something, after spending all day looking for you all over London. First you leave the palace as a soul that the devil carries, knowing that I don't ride as well as you. When I get to you, after you deign to stop the race and wait for me, you tell me you have a lot of business to do and then we'll see each other at Dover House. When I go for you to Dover House, you went away to Parliament, and I'm going there, but from there you went to a meeting of your party in a club of those where you go the damn Whigs. Anyway, I had to search to you all over the city until I found you, and at no time did you say more than a pair of monosyllables. I do not ask you much, just something like, 'How was your day, George?' George said, mixing sarcasm, anger and a mocking tone. Lord Melbourne did not answer and walked in silence. "Okay, I get it. Do not worry, I'm only here for when you want to talk," George added as they walked through the front door of the mansion. A middle-aged man, plump and with fat and flushed cheeks, went out to meet them both. It was Joseph, the butler of Lord George's mansion. "My lord. Lord Melbourne, is a pleasure to see you," said Joseph very sympathetically. "Hello Joseph, I'm happy to see you too," Lord Melbourne replied, trying to sound kind, but he was serious. "William, advance to the library, while I give Joseph instructions," George told Lord Melbourne. William went in the direction of Lord George's library, while George spoke to Joseph. "William is going through a very hard time, Joseph. He is very angry and depressed, with his spirit on the ground. We have to be a little patient and sympathetic to him," George said with concern. "I'm sorry to hear that, my lord." "You know that I sincerely appreciate Lord Melbourne," Joseph answered truthfully. "I know, Joseph. But for now I can only try to get William's mind stripped of that dark cloud that torments him. In the meantime, you order them to bring Lord Melbourne and me a bottle of the best whiskey, and food, you know, which I like when I drink. But first I'm going to write a message so you can send it urgently to Mr. Carter, with customary discretion," George said, with a certain tone of a conspirator in the end. "Of course, my lord," Joseph replied with a knowing look and a discreet and understanding gesture on his face. After giving instructions to Joseph, Lord George sighed and went to the library where Lord Melbourne was waiting for him. They both sat in armchairs, chatting while they drank. After a few minutes Lord Melbourne began to open his soul and tell his childhood friend, his lifelong confidant, the details of his painful conversation with Victoria. "William, I cannot say what you should do, I can only give you my opinion as someone who loves you like a brother. But according to what you tell me, she was worried about your feelings, and from your words it seems clear that she wants to be a good wife and make you happy, or at least try. You know her better than I do, and you will know if it seemed to you that she spoke sincerely, and if so, why not give her a chance?" said George. "Tell me, how can I forget that she loves Albert and was in his arms? What she expects a son of him," replied Lord Melbourne with rancor and anguish. "She wanted to explain it to you, William, you did not leave her," George replied as a fair man with Victoria. "What a damn explanation her conduct may have. Any explanation ends with her on the bed of the damned Prince Albert," exclaimed Lord Melbourne exalted. George saw Lord Melbourne sitting in an armchair, legs crossed and a glass of whiskey in one hand, his face red with rage and liquor. George knew that Lord Melbourne allowed himself to be stripped of his face of habitual serenity and emotional self-control, and to show his true emotions in all their intensity, with very few people, and he was perhaps the only person with whom his friend dared to show everything, his pain and his anger. And what he saw did not like anything, because he had seen his friend so badly only on 2 previous occasions, and now he was even worse, which caused him great concern. "William, I know that your situation is not easy, and that is why I can only advise you to have patience, a lot of patience, and trust in time. Time is the solution," time will allow you to see things in perspective and cure your pain and your rancor. In time you can forgive the lack of Victoria, or at least understand her. I only beg you as your friend, as your heart brother, do not rush and do not make things worse with Victoria. William, you are the best man I have ever met in my life, and you are very reasonable and generous when it comes to judging the people. How can you not be with the woman you love? Remember what your mother always said you, and what she said about you. William is the strongest man in the world, because it takes a lot of strength to see the weaknesses of your fellow men and to have the generosity of not judging them with excessive severity, even knowing that you are better than them, George said with affection and understanding. Appeal on my mother's memory is a blow below the belt, George. I know what you're trying to do, to remind me that, despite her behavior, her many faults, she loved me and I loved her, Lord Melbourne said with resignation and a certain sadness. You know I loved your mother, that I adored her. I would never mention her to you, except with respect and admiration. And I do it for your well-being, replied George truthfully. I know, George, but you're wrong. The difference between my mother and Victoria, aside from the obvious one about the nature of the relationship, is that my mother loved me, and Victoria. Lord Melbourne answered, without finishing the sentence. Do not you think a woman can love more than one man in her life? George asked as if he would offer comfort to his friend. Do you think a woman can fall in love again with a man she stopped loving? Replied Lord Melbourne. Do you think Victoria stopped loving you? George countered. I prefer to think that she no longer loved me when she slept with Albert, otherwise it would be more embarrassing and less acceptable. A woman who sleeps with a man without being married to him, without being bound by the bond of marriage, and she being in love with another man, that is difficult to justify, at least for the man who loves her, explained Lord Melbourne with bitterness. Lord Melbourne drank the contents of a glass full of whisky, and then poured himself another drink, which he drank in half. And as long as she loves me again, you know what I think. And with a memory of her love for him living among us day after day for the rest of our lives, Lord Melbourne said bitterly, evidently referring at child who Victoria was waiting. George leaned back in his armchair and drank a drink as he saw the anguish and sadness in Lord Melbourne. William, if all this goes well, if Peel, Wellington, Leopold and yourself get that the marriage be approved, and Victoria and you get married, what are you going to do? What will happen? George asked in the interest of a worried friend or brother. I do not know. I suppose I die. To live a few years and then to leave Victoria suitably widowed to find happiness, replied William depressed, gloomily. Do not say that, William. George exclaimed sadly as he looked around, so he could not see his friend. George, do you think I hate her? Asked Lord Melbourne, seeing his friend, who looked back at him. I still love her. I love her more than my life. I would gladly give my life for her. And that's why it hurts so much, George. It hurts because I feel that I've lost her, although it is assumed I'm closer than ever to have her. It hurts me because one day she proposed that I be her companion in life, and although I had to reject her, I had the consolation to know that she loved me. But then Albert appeared and she broke my heart, broke it, falling so fast in love with him and proposing marriage to him when the words she said in Brocket Hall had not yet dissipated. But I swallowed my damn pain, swallowed my sadness and my pride, tried to put my best face and fulfill my duty as her Prime Minister, so that she could walk to the altar to surrender to another man. And I drowning in the damn liquor to anesthetize my pain. George saw that Lord Melbourne was unburdened as he had seldom done in his life, releasing all the pain he had accumulated in his heart, and that with every word his bitterness and rage increased. With each step she gave to her marriage, I took a step further into hell, feeling that I was sinking into a dark abyss of suffering. And then one day a mad condemned man shot the Clockwork Prince, believing that with it he was going to unleash the revolution on the German principalities. And I swear to you, George, I felt compassion for him and for Victoria, of course. And I felt remorse because deep down I felt a perverse joy because I was not going to lose Victoria, to my victory. Until the day before yesterday, when that measly Leopold told me that she was pregnant with him. Pregnant? Do you know what I felt, George? I felt a damn pain in my chest. As if that cursed Leopold would have shoved his hand in my chest and he had take out my heart out in front of me, said Lord Melbourne, banging his chest with his clenched fist, and I felt disgust, anger, and rancor. And since then, I have no peace. I feel that tightness in my chest, I feel that discomfort in my stomach and that weight in my head, that feeling that my brain is going to explode at any moment. But the worst of all, is that every once I close my eyes come to my mind images of Victoria naked in bed with him, being possessed by him, the woman who wanted to be my companion, who said she loved me, is in those visions in my head, giving her virginity to another man, without waiting to be married to him, forgetting the decency, her modesty of woman and even her duty as queen. And now I must marry her, to wash her honor. An honor that I have not stained. And the man she loved so much that she was capable of sacrificing her virtue, that man will live with us, be present in his son or daughter, and every time I see that child I will remember that Victoria loved so much to him, and I will ask myself if what she feels for me is as great as what she felt for him, or it is simply obligation or gratitude what compels her to be with me. And that is why the damn Albert in the end has triumphed. From the grave he won the war and mocked me and will make fun of me for the rest of my life. Albert, that damned prince of tin, that ridiculous puppet, that petulant and sanctimonious marionette, with his airs of grandeur and his stupid way of talking, that fool with ice in his veins, that accursed foreigner who dared to teach me about England. To me. That sinister scarecrow who looked at me with contempt, that damned spoiled child, that damn bastard. Lord Melbourne concluded with a shriek, and in a fit of fury he struck the small table between them, causing the bottle of whisky in it to fall to the ground and break into pieces. Lord Melbourne covered his face with one hand, and his body trembled with emotion. A servant who had heard the bottle break, opened the library door cautiously after tapping softly, but Lord George motioned for him to withdraw and the man closed the door. Lord Melbourne was silent for a few minutes, regaining the serenity and composure. Then he removed his hand from his face and saw George with red eyes, evidence that he had cried or at least suppressed the crying. "I'm sorry, George," he said with sincerity and shame. "Do not worry. It is a pity that you were not so passionate in governing England, because we would already own the whole world. But you preferred to be a missy as Prime Minister," George said mockingly and winked. "Damned idiot!" Lord Melbourne exclaimed, unable to stop himself from laughing, touched by the fact that he knew his friend was using a sense of humor to relieve his pain. "That's why my mother adored you." They both laughed, and in Lord Melbourne laughter mingled with tears, for he felt many conflicting emotions amidst his depression. After a while, they both spoke more calmly. "Do you remember when Lydia died?" George asked with deep sadness. "How to forget it?" Lord Melbourne answered, feeling compassion for his friend. "You did not let me die then." "I'll never let you die," George said, closing his eyes. "I know, you saved me twice." "I only one," Lord Melbourne replied, his voice broken with emotion. "Who's counting?" exclaimed George. A few minutes later the knock came at the door, and George gave permission for butler Joseph to enter. "My lord, the young ladies you were waiting for arrived," Joseph said in a tone of discretion. "Magnificent! Make them pass, Joseph," George replied. When the butler came out, Lord Melbourne saw George with alarm, and some anger. "Ladies? What ladies?" asked Lord Melbourne nervously. "You calm. Relax," George answered. Before Lord Melbourne could continue to demand explanations, two beautiful young women entered the library when Joseph opened the door for them. One was blonde and of medium stature, with a nice face and large breasts that looked in a neckline more or less generous. The other was a little taller, with white skin and dark hair, with a face more beautiful than her companions, and similarly large breasts. Both of them were dressed quite elegantly, almost like two ladies from high society. The women bowed. "My lords, my name is Catherine and that of my companion Georgiana, at your service," said the dark-haired woman. "It's a pleasure, ladies. I am Lord Peter and my friend is Lord Charles," said George. After the introduction, George cordially invited the women to sit down and drink something. Lord Melbourne also behaved kindly, but to a good observer it was evident that he was uncomfortable. The four of them began a lively chat, in which it became evident that George was more interested in the blonde, while the brunette was interested in Lord Melbourne, who, with kindness, but a certain distance responded to her advances. At one point in the night, Lord Melbourne took George aside. "George, these women are prostitutes," said Lord Melbourne with a certain tone of complaint. "I'm glad to see you're still insightful," George said mockingly. "Do not be funny. I'm not in the mood for these things. You really think I want to be with a prostitute today?" "Today?" exclaimed Lord Melbourne in a low voice. "I think you're in the perfect frame of mind. Do not you want to stop thinking about Victoria? Even if it's a while. You need to channel your anger and frustration into something that gives you pleasure. You have to take out that man who lives in you and that you constantly repress. Damn it! Allow yourself to be human tonight, and forget your duty. You need a rematch against everyone, even against Victoria, especially against her. Tonight, try to be a libertine and decadent aristocrat, try to do what any rich or poor man does when a woman breaks his heart, forget it in the arms of a whore. And you will see that tomorrow you will feel a little better, after showing your manhood in the arms of a woman who cares only for you for to fuck, without feelings, without jealousy, without pain," George replied with some vehemence. "Did you rehearse that speech?" asked Lord Melbourne with sarcasm and a little anger. "Do what you want. No one will force you to sleep with the whore, but choose if you prefer to spend the night crying and feeling humiliated, or you want to send the devil everything and behave like a damn man." "I would not hesitate if I were in your place," said George as if he were rebuking him, and then turned away from him to walk toward the women, while Lord Melbourne saw them. After a while, George had left with the blonde to his bedroom, leaving Lord Melbourne alone with the brunette, both sitting on a sofa in a room. "My lord, forgive the question, but why are you so sad?" Catherine said softly. "Do I look sad?" said Lord Melbourne seriously and depressed. "Yes, and also angry. I'm sure normally you are not like that, I'll bet you're usually a charming man," Catherine replied. "Today maybe it's been one of the worst days of my life, so maybe it's not the best day for me to be in company of humans. Maybe now I would be better surrounded by the beasts or just alone," said Lord Melbourne bitterly. "It's a pity, my lord. Because, you are a very handsome man, if you let me say it, and I feel that you are also a passionate man, and that any woman would be happy to be in your arms," Catherine said in a seductive voice and an insinuating gesture on her face. "Do you really believe what you say?" asked Lord Melbourne with disbelief in his voice. "Do you say it because I'm a prostitute?" "My lord, I have no habit of lying to my clients. When I am in front of an ugly-looking or even repulsive customer, I prefer to remain silent or talk about other things, but not lie to him. I never say a compliment with hypocrisy," Catherine answered in a calm but firm voice. "I'm sorry, miss. As I told you, I'm not a good company today, it's not the best day to meet me," Lord Melbourne apologized sadly. "My lord, you do not have to apologize. We've all had horrible days. But what I told you is true, you are a very handsome man and I also believe that you have an inner fire, a passion that perhaps today is very dark, but that any woman would be happy to know anyway," Catherine insisted sensuously, coming closer to him. "A cultured woman, besides beautiful. Is it possible that you have so much interest in this idiot who speaks to you?" Lord Melbourne answered in a slightly derisive tone, but he could not help showing some excitement. Catherine came over and kissed him on the lips, a soft sweet kiss, but exciting. Lord Melbourne let her do it. "Does that answer, my lord?" she asked as she broke the kiss, the excitement in her eyes. "Do you want to go up?" Lord Melbourne asked with a dark gaze, lascivious gesture on his face. "Of course, my lord," she replied with an impudent smile that promised a lot. The rest happened hasty. Lord Melbourne and Catherine went up to the guest bedroom they had reserved for Lord Melbourne. No sooner had they crossed the door than Lord Melbourne pushed her against a wall and put his hands on her breasts above her cleavage and squeezed them. They kissed passionately on the lips, desperately. Eagerly, Lord Melbourne took Catherine's clothes off, while she helped, partly to avoid, that in his despair he will hurt her dress. She helped him to undress, with the skill of who is accustomed to such chores. Both being totally naked, Lord Melbourne pushed her and made her fall back to back on the bed. Like a hungry beast he threw himself on her and buried his head in Catherine's crotch, and he practiced cunnilingus. Catherine squirmed excitedly as Lord Melbourne stimulated her. After a moment, Lord Melbourne slid over Catherine's naked body, and began to kiss and suck on her breasts. He was anxious, desperate, hungry, behaved aggressively, almost violently, and in his frenzy almost hurt Catherine, but she, instead of complaining, she enjoyed. It was not long before he penetrated her. He did it rudely, almost with rage. Despite being moist with sexual excitement, Catherine felt pain from the rough way he penetrated her, and reflected it on her face. But at once she began to enjoy it, to complain, to gasp and to howl with pleasure, while Lord Melbourne lunged against her. With her legs up, with her feet in the air, Catherine received grateful the thrust of Lord Melbourne, who in a rhythmic and frantic movement kept penetrating her. As he did so, bursts of images came to mind, of fictitious visions of a naked Victoria being penetrated by Albert, and then he reacted angrily, trying to remove those images from his head, and with his body attacked the body of Catherine with more fury. The woman's whining were already screams, and she hugged Lord Melbourne, clung tightly to him, until she uttered a cry and reached the climax, shortly before Lord Melbourne reached his own and poured his seed into her. They recovered and they did it again, again, and again. When they were exhausted, Catherine rested naked about Lord Melbourne's naked body, who watching the woman. "Excuse me if I hurt you," said Lord Melbourne, pointing to a few bruises on the woman's body, which he had occasioned by holding her violently during the sexual act. "Do not worry, my lord. It was worth it," Catherine replied, with a lascivious smile of satisfaction, then kissed Lord Melbourne. They began to talk about the woman's life, and she told him that she was from Wales, from a poor family, and that after getting pregnant when she was very young, and father of her child abandoned her, her father ran her off his house. Thus began the path that led her to be a prostitute and ended up living in London, where she worked for a luxury pimp that provided girls to very wealthy clients. All to give your child a better life. Lord Melbourne listened with interest, asked several questions and was very kind, but his mind was far from there. "How is she? The woman who makes my lord suffer so much?" Catherine asked affectionately and sympathetically. Lord Melbourne sighed, a sad sigh. "She's much younger than me, in fact, she's so young that she could be my daughter. It is even a few years younger than you. It is beautiful, not beautiful in a way spectacular and very sensual, if not a way more discreet and natural, but anyway it seems to me the most beautiful woman in the world, with her beautiful eyes, her sweet face and her small but beautiful body. She is intelligent, cultured, cheerful, and brave, but she is also stubborn, impetuous, indiscreet, and inconstant, so inconstant that after declaring her love for me, ended up falling in love with another man. Although I must admit that it was partly my fault, for ward off her from me, for her own sake. But now that other man left her life forever and I am forced to rescue her, to save her honour," said Lord Melbourne without being able to avoid unburden, although he feared to be talking too much, although that woman did not know its true identity. "From what you tells me, she gave her virtue as a maid to that other man. If that is what torments my lord, you must remember that for a woman is much more important her last man than the first. The definitive man, the one who ultimately stays with a woman and gives her heart, that is much more important than the one who took her virginity. At least for most women, and if it is for fear that she cannot love you, for loving to the other man, she should be a real fool not to love a man like you, Catherine said sympathetically, trying reassure him. Thank you very much. You're charming, Lord Melbourne replied with a smile. But later, when Catherine slept beside him, Lord Melbourne had his eyes fixed on the ceiling, unable to stop thinking about Victoria. Elsewhere in the city, in her bedroom at Buckingham Palace, Victoria could not sleep either, crying inconsolably. Embracing the telescope that Lord Melbourne gave her on one of her birthdays, Victoria was crying and pouting. Dash was on the bed and licked Victoria's face, as if the dog tried to comfort his owner. My poor Lord M. Since he met me he has done nothing but love me and protect me, and sacrifice for me. And I have only paid him with pain, and my beloved Albert, it seems that I brought the misfortune to his life. I am a curse to all men who love me and whom I have loved. Dash, this night he is suffering. My dear Lord M., where will you be? How will you be?